Yep. Nice to see everybody. Well, I had a verse that I thought we would explore today. Jata Shradho Matkatashu Nirvinna Sarvakarmasa Veda Jugatmakam Kaman Prityage Api Anishwadaha. Jata Shradho. Jata means having been born. So, Jata Shraddha. Shraddha means faith in Sanskrit. Shrad means trust. And Dha means to place. So, something you place your trust in. Jata Shradho, having awakened faith, mat katasu, in my talks, in talks about me. You guys are really spread out, but I guess that's what we want. We want people spread out. So normally I'd be like, why don't you guys just crunch down? That way I don't have to look, my peripheral vision isn't going to get so challenged, but I'm just going to leave it. This is good. It's good that you guys are spread out. Shraddha in Sanskrit is an interesting word. The word shrad, which means trust, doesn't exist anywhere in any Vedic text ever. You just find it in an explanation of the meaning of the word shraddha. That's thousands of years old. That it's a combination of two words, shrad and da, placing your trust. There's no, like usually in Sanskrit you can find a dhatu, a verbal root, like respiration has the S-P-I-R. It's also where you get the word spirit from. Respire, respiration, spirit, they all come from the same word. Or spectator, spectacle, spectacles, they all have the same S-P-E-C. These are verbal roots in linguistics. And so normally, you get these verbal roots and you can figure out where a word comes from. Sanskrit's an old enough language where sometimes, occasionally, you can't find the verbal root. Shraddha is one such word. Usually there's a family of words that come from a verbal root, and then you can trace out etymologically the origin of a language. Does that make sense? Like, for instance, the word agnostic. Agnostic means you don't know. A lot of times people think agnostic means you believe in something, but you don't know what you believe in. Have you guys ever heard the word agnostic used like that? Like, I believe in something, but I'm agnostic. That's not agnostic. That means you're a theist, and you just are a very generic form of theism. Maybe it's animist, maybe it's deist, but it's usually just a generic form of theism, and you haven't figured out what you believe and what you don't believe yet. And agnostic literally means you don't know. You put the A in front of the word gnosis, and so agnosis means not knowledge. Gnosis means knowledge. Like the Gnostics of early Christianity, they were the knowers. Roughly equivalent to the word kavi in Sanskrit. The knowers, the poets. So the Gnostics knew, and if you're agnostic, you don't know. And gnosis comes from what Sanskrit root? Gya, which means to know, which is where you get the word gyan from. So you trace out the etymology of terms, you figure out where all the different words come from, and you can trace out family trees, not even just through one language, but through multiple language over thousands of years. And that's good etymology, historical linguistics. You get these gradual changes in phonemes, and if you can trace them out through space and time, you can figure out the origin of a language. Shraddha doesn't have that. There is a statement by one grammarian that says it's a combination of two words. But other than his stating it's a combination of two words, there's nowhere in the ancient literature that Shrud occurs as a verbal root. Does that make sense? It's far out, isn't it?
Surprising.
Yeah.
Perfect sense.
So Shraddha is where you place your trust. We have a definition of Shraddha, about 4 centuries old in Bengali. One of our theologians put it together. He said, Shraddha Shabde Bishwas Sudridha Nischoy Krishna Bhakti Hoila Sarva Karma Krita Hoy. The word Shraddha Shabde, the word Shraddha, Bishwas is another word for faith. So a lot of times you get this, where you'll define one word by another word which means more or less the same thing. And sometimes if you look in a dictionary and you look up love and affection, and then you'll go back to love. And so under love you'll have the word affection, under affection you'll have the word love. An attachment might be thrown in there, and if you look up 3 or 4 words, you wind up right back where you started. Because that's what happens. You kind of point to one thing and point to something else, and you try and get a feel for it, and you're trying to convey a feeling through language, which is symbolic. And so you wind up at the same place again. And really what you're looking at in definitions is families of synonyms with context attached. Do you guys follow this? So anyway, Shraddha Shabde Bishwas. Bishwas means faith. Again, it's another word for faith. Sudridha Nischoy. Sudridha means very powerful. Nischoy means certain. So it's the very powerful, very certain conviction. Krishna Bhakti Hoila, that where there will be Krishna Bhakti, Sarva Karma Krita Hoy, that all worthwhile acts will be accomplished. It's interesting because a lot of times if you're looking at the way the word faith is used in English, faith is, you can go back to the Bible and you can go back to Paul. Faith is trust in things as yet unseen. So, in Paul's definition of faith, faith is a mere, Paul's definition of faith is roughly congruent with how the word faith is used in English today. If you were to think of an antonym for faith, what would it be? Reason. Faith and reason exist as antonyms. I mean, you could say faithless, obviously, you could use a word like that. But if you look at the way the word faith gets used, it's like, the whole belief versus reason. Faith versus logic. And so you have a family of words over here, logic and reason, and another family of words over here, belief and faith. And what that leads one to believe is that if you have faith or a belief in something, you are unreasonable and illogical. Do you follow this? I'm not willing to surrender that ground. It's important to know if you're going to have a debate or a disagreement with somebody, you got to figure out where the linchpin is, what you actually disagree on, and you got to draw your line in the sand. In a formal debate, you start out with a proposition, and then one person agrees that they are for that proposition, and the other party agrees that they're against that proposition. And if you want to get really sophisticated, the next step is that you figure out what stands as evidence, what's admissible as evidence to prove or disprove the proposition. Do you guys follow this? So epidemiological evidence in science is the first tier of evidence. People filling out forms and they're answering questions and questionnaires and stuff. And they're compiling data, self-reported data oftentimes on something. But then you got to get into double-blind peer review, double-blind studies, if you want to actually prove something and get approved by the FDA or something like that for a medicine. You follow this? And so you have different tiers of evidence, and then you'll start and you'll make an argument. This happens in a court of law as well. Some evidence is circumstantial. Some evidence goes to someone's character. Some evidence is hearsay. Sometimes they'll have, DNA evidence. That almost trumps everything. Sometimes eyewitness testimony from multiple sources trumps everything. Used to be, sometimes there'd be an eyewitness, and a black person would say, I didn't commit that murder, and some white person would say, I saw him commit the murder, and the guy would go to prison just because they value the testimony of one person over another. Non-Muslims. I'm going off on a tangent, but it is what it is. We're going down the road. Islam is about the enforcement of Sharia law on people. The first day of the Islamic calendar isn't the day Muhammad was born or the day he received his first message from Allah. The first day of the Islamic calendar, day 1, is the day that Muhammad conquered Medina and established Sharia. Islam is Sharia. The 4 major schools of Islam are 4 ways of interpreting Sharia. Dar al-Harb, a house of war, is any country where Sharia is not enforced. Dar al-Salam, a house of peace, is any country where Sharia is enforced. It doesn't matter if Muslims make up the majority or the minority of the population. What matters is that Sharia is enforced. Turkey is, practically speaking, entirely made up of Muslims. They got rid of all the Christians. The Orthodox Church was the church of Turkey for 1,000 years. But the Ottoman Empire came in, they took over, and they established Islam. They broke down all the churches. They put up mosques in place of churches. And practically speaking, now the population of Turkey is almost all Islamic. But Muslim terrorists, Muslim extremists consider it to be a house of war because they have a secular government. Do you guys follow this? Part of Sharia is that a non-Muslim cannot testify against a Muslim in court. You can be convicted as a Muslim of a crime, but not by a non-Muslim giving testimony. We did the same thing in this country with white people and black people as recently as during my parents' lifetime. Not during mine, but during my parents' lifetime. Actually, during my lifetime as well. It's just, it was on the books during my parents' lifetime. It was shameless and brazen. Whereas now, when this is done and they weight somebody's testimony, they can't do so based on the color because race is one of the 5 protected or 7 protected classes, depending on what state you're living in these days, and the laws are changing. Okay. So, when you want to give evidence for something, it's critical that you figure out what will stand as evidence in a given debate. And I would draw the line between faith and reason. I would say that's a point I'm unwilling to concede. It used to be logos. Logos is where you get the word logic from, obviously, and theology and psychology and every other ology you can imagine. Scatology. You guys know what that is? It's the study of feces. And so, all the ologies, the logi in the psychology or whatever it might be, that logi is logos. It's from logos, it's from logic in Greek. The book of John in the Bible begins with the statement, in the beginning was logos, and logos was theos. And it was logic, and logic was God. It used to be, for the Greeks, it used to be for most of the world, that your mathematicians were also your theologians. Like a classic example would be Pythagoras. But most of the ancient Greeks were fascinated with mathematics because it was a way you could get around infinite regress and my opinion versus your opinion, and you get down to something where we could demonstrate it to anybody. It was repeatable. It was demonstrable. Sometimes it could become self-evident. You're looking for self-evident truths. That's why Kant was into cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. He was looking for something undoubtable philosophically to build his worldview on. And so for the Greeks, they got down to math, and they would abstract from there and try to get to some philosophical truths, some moral truths. You have to build on things you can see to get to things you can't see. Moral truths are unseeable things. I can say, this table is 2 feet long, but to argue what I should do with this table, what I ought to do with this table, what would be a good use for this table, that's ethics. Moving from an is, it is 2 feet long, to what you should do with it. This is normative and applied ethics. To move from is to ought, in the language of Hume, it's a dilemma. How do you get from an is to an ought? Or more recently, it's called the fact-value distinction. How do you get from a fact about something to what has value in terms of using that thing for value? What is valuable? Anytime you discuss what is valuable, either what's beautiful, that's aesthetics, or what's good, that's ethics. You're moving from what is demonstrable in the world to what ought to be or what should be. And what you really do is you introduce premises. Like, you should be vegan. Why should you be vegan? Because it's healthier. What if somebody was to respond to you and say, I don't want to be healthy? The premise is you should do what's healthier. But if somebody goes, I actually don't agree with that premise. I don't think you should do what's healthier. They go, well, then you're going to die sooner. He goes, yeah, but everybody dies eventually. So, why live a long life and get Alzheimer's disease and get thrown in an old folks' home, and I'll die a little younger and I'll be able to pass on my wealth to my children. This whole scam, we rob people of all their wealth the last couple of years of their life by charging them a few $100,000 a year just to prolong their life for a few months. Wipe out their wealth. Big pharma, big medicine. I'd rather eat unhealthy. I'd rather enjoy what I eat. What do you respond then? Well, you set a bad example for your kids. I hate my kids. I want to set a bad example for them. Or you could argue, actually, I'll set a good example for my kids. I'll teach them what my own values are, which is to live life and enjoy, and what's the problem? You're setting a bad example for your kids. Touche. It's a double-edged argument. You can easily reverse it, put it back on the other person. What's better for the planet? I don't care about the planet. You're a hypocrite because you love your dog, but you kill an animal with the same C neural receptors, the nociceptors, it feels pain the exact same way your dog does, the same way your children do, for that matter. And then the person responds and says, everybody's hypocritical about some stuff. You're causing unnecessary pain. Everybody's causing pain to somebody. Jivo jivasya jivanam. One living being is food for another. You're getting really bad. The devil can quote scripture, How do you win an argument with somebody like that? Answer simple, you don't. Yeah, you win with everybody else. What I'm doing, I'm trying to find something you got to agree to. Some platform that you and I agree to. Not being hypocritical, being consistent in your belief, not engaging in cognitive dissonance, not being unnecessarily cruel and sadistic, doing things that are good for your health, doing things that are good for the planet, doing things that are good for your children. I'm trying to find some kind of a foothold with you that you will agree to, and I can build that argument off of a common platform that we both agree to. You follow? That's how you do metaphysics. That's how you do moral philosophy. That's how you do anything beyond the physical. Meta means beyond. Beyond physical. Metaphysics is from Aristotle. Beyond the physical. Now we're into the realm of morality or spirituality. We got to find a way to jump beyond the physical. You got to find some kind of common ground. That's why the Greeks were into math, because the common ground they could share with almost anybody. You got to get pretty stupid and lobotomized to deny basic math and geometry. And then everybody else in the room was like, well, I'm not. That guy's an idiot. And you start to lose your influence. And so maybe you can't convince the person, but you convince everybody else in the room. You follow? I think having faith in God is perfectly reasonable. I agree with the ancient Greeks and the followers of the Veda. I agree with the book of John. I think it's perfectly respectable and intellectually astute and defensible and reasonable and logical to have faith in divinity. I think faith is way more common than people want to have you believe. Faith is generally used to refer to the trust in divinity that theists have. But I like to define faith as enough interest in a hypothesis that you take the trouble to go in the laboratory and do the experiment. You follow that? We encounter many hypotheses in our life. What's going to get you in shape? What's a healthy diet? Who you should marry? What you should name your children? Where you should send to school? Where you should live? What your career should be? People you can trust? What are worthwhile hobbies? We place value on all sorts of things. But those things aren't fully demonstrable at the outset. When you go to a jiu-jitsu academy to learn jiu-jitsu, let's say you want to learn jiu-jitsu, so you go to jiu-jitsu school. Do you have the ability to discern whether the person who's teaching you jiu-jitsu is a good teacher of jiu-jitsu? Ultimately, not quite, because you'd have to already know jiu-jitsu to be able to discern whether the person was a good teacher. You follow? Plus, some people are good teachers, but they're not the best practitioners. So, there's plenty of amazing boxing coaches, like Freddie Roach, the famous boxing coach in Los Angeles. The guy was a terrible boxer. He was a terrible pro boxer. But he's one of the best coaches in the world. John Danaher's arguably the best jiu-jitsu coach in the world. He's got a bum hip and a bum knee. But his students win everything. Being a great teacher doesn't necessarily mean a great practitioner. You could have lousy techniques, but teach them really well. And the only way your students are going to find out that those techniques are lousy, that you've taught really well, is when they go to try to use them and they don't work. But you taught them really well, but they were just bad techniques. But you're an amazing teacher. It's going to take time. I got into gemology because I got tired of getting ripped off when I was buying gems. So I had to study gemology to figure out how to tell good gems from bad gems. Because obviously everybody you talk to about gems is going to lie to you and tell you they're better than they are. You follow? There's no shortcut to really thoroughly understanding a topic except for to take the long road of being an apprentice and a journeyman to become a master on a topic. In the meantime, as we start to wet our beak and dip our toe and try stuff out, we have faith. That if we go to college, we're going to get a better paying job. That the teacher knows what they're talking about. That the person who's teaching us how to speak Spanish is actually good at speaking Spanish. Like there's translators and then there's translators. There's levels to everything. What might impress you isn't necessarily going to impress somebody else. How do you start in a new field? You have some faith. You have a hypothesis. Oh, they got the degree on the wall. They seem reasonably competent. Some other people told me they were good. I got a couple of testimonies. And so I'll give it a try. Like I'm opening a boba shop next week. And I have to work on what's called bar flow. A vegan boba shop. So we got to work on something called bar flow. Bar flow is the way a place that serves beverages puts liquid into a cup with various other items and sometimes blends it or modifies it and then gets it out the door. Not just like bartending flow, like in a place that serves alcohol, but also in a coffee shop or something like that. The thing is, I don't drink coffee. I never have in my life. I drank coffee one time when I was 9. It was Folgers. Instant. I tried it, a couple of sips, and I was like, this sucks. And I've never felt any reason to go back and try it again. I also don't take caffeine, and so there's really no reason. Recently, my friend, that tatted guy in the back there, criminal guy. No, you, man. He got me to try coffee. He made some cold brew, decaffeinated coffee with some chai spices and offered it to Krishna and brought it to me, and I felt obliged. So I tried it, and it was okay. But it had this burnt flavor to it. And I was like, why would anybody want to drink something which fundamentally has a burnt flavor to it? You follow? It just didn't make sense to me. Maybe it's an acquired taste. Like smoking is an acquired taste. Nobody breathes in smoke and thinks, wow, that was really good. They cough and it's rough. And then maybe they like the way it makes them feel. But nobody's like, wow, this is what I've been waiting for, is to breathe fire. You have to, through peer pressure or a desire to get the intoxicating effects of whatever it is you're imbibing, suffer until your body becomes accustomed to the thing, actually. Anyway, alcohol is the same way. Nobody drinks alcohol like, wow, that tastes wonderful. It's always an acquired taste. You don't give like alcohol to a baby and they're like, this doesn't work like that. The naive reaction to it is it's repulsive, not meant for human consumption. You have to override that for whatever reason. Generally, it's peer pressure to start, and then you get a taste for it. Anyway, I'm opening a boba shop. We got to deal with bar flow. So they are both baristas, like serious baristas with many years. How many years you got?
About 15.
You yourself personally? And then you? So they got 23 years of pouring beverages and bar flow experience. So I'm like, hey, I want you guys to come to my restaurant with me after we finish the program, and we're going to knock out this whole thing and figure out bar flow, and then we're going to buy $1,000 of equipment. So then he was like, I don't know, boba's new, it's different. I'll do my best, but I got to guess. I don't really know what I'm talking about. And I said to him, look, just what are you talking about? You've got 23 years experience between you. You're total experts. You might not know this exact field, but you know it enough, and we're going to take some risks, and I'm going to spend some money, and if we end up wasting money because we do it wrong, then I'll never blame you. And we're good. I want your expertise, nothing less, but nothing more. You don't need to. I gave him some homework to study, but it'll take him 15 minutes to study it, and then we're going to make decisions, and then we're going to spend some money and get done. I got faith in them. I don't know that you have 15 years of experience, but I think you're trustworthy. Why would you lie to me? You seem to be a trustworthy person. We spent some time together. I could vet you, try to verify it, pull your credit, something like that. This is life. You do a bit of research, you get a reasonable hypothesis. It's not a theory yet. It hasn't been tested enough to even be a valid theory, but it's a hypothesis, not just some wacky idea. Like if Ryan would say to me, hey, give me $1 million and I'll help you turn lead into gold. I wouldn't bother even entertaining such an idea. Some ideas or some arguments on the surface, they don't even pass the sniff test. Other ones are quite compelling and they're quite reasonable, and then what do you do when you want to actually figure out whether it's right or whether it's wrong? You got to pull the trigger and go. You got to get in the lab and make some moves. Make some mistakes. Try things out. We do that in relationships. We do that with our college education. We do that with jobs. We do that with instruments, when we're learning languages, when we're picking hobbies, when we're choosing friends to hang out with, where we're going to go on vacation, hotels we're going to stay at. I went to a hotel one time, I was up at Badrinath. Badrinath is the actual border between India and China up in the Himalayas. And there's a holy place up there because Hindu people like to build temples. Just like the more out in the middle of nowhere you can get, the cooler you are and the more people will come. So Badrinath is one of the most exotic places. I mean, nobody goes to Badrinath. Like, I meet 100 Hindus, none of them have been to Badrinath. I've been to Badrinath half a dozen times, but nobody goes because it is, from Delhi, it is about 30 hours drive from Delhi. And there's no way to get there otherwise, unless you take a helicopter. You could helicopter in. If you're that guy, you could do that. Otherwise, it's 30 hours of driving. Am I lying? I'm not lying. Am I lying? Actually, 30 hours of driving. And 30 hours of like serious driving through mountain paths and up and down, and it's no joke. It's quite the austerity to get there. Anyway, I stayed in a hotel in Badrinath. They had hundreds of 5-star reviews. I got there. You don't pay ahead of time when you're going to a hill station, because if the roads get blocked and you paid ahead of time, you don't get your money back. And they know that. So if you offer to pay ahead of time, a deposit, they'll ask you. And if you say yes, then they'll take your money, and then you don't get your money back ever. But if you refuse to pay, then they know that you know what you're talking about, and that's cool, and they wait till you get there. So I rolled up to the hotel that had great reviews up in Badrinath, in the middle of nowhere, after, a harrowing 30-hour car journey with a crew of like a bunch of people, 30 people, who really wanted to stop. And we got to the hotel, and the hotel was bad. And the whole thing was a scam. And all those reviews on TripAdvisor were fake. Anyway, what I did was they prepared a vegan meal for us. So I had everybody eat. I then jumped in a Jeep. We ran over to the actual hotel I knew was better. I thought was like not as good, but I knew it was good. I went there, negotiated rates right out on the spot, came back, and as they were about to show people to the rooms, I said, don't go to your rooms, just get back in the vehicle. And we just amscrayed, went over to the better place. I paid them for the meal, obviously. But they were bummed, because it was like, man, they were bummed. I made a move. This is life. So what happens is you're wandering through life and you're thinking, what am I doing here? I'm conscious, consciousness, thought, free will. These things do not appear to be coming from chemicals. When I look at the world, there seems to be a pretty stark distinction between life and matter. I do not find that chemicals are conscious. The argument that consciousness is somehow derivative of matter seems to be a fantasy. In no iteration or combination do we find that consciousness emerges from matter in any kind of an experiment. Consciousness appears to be properly basic. You're able to have thoughts about things, qualia, the experience, the movie that's going on in your head right now, with taste, sight, touch, smell, and sound in 3D, with a voiceover narrative that's going on since you were born in this world, appears to be fundamentally distinct from anything we find in the chemical world. Therefore, atheism seems to be an unworkable hypothesis for me. Rather, I think that consciousness must be a basic fundamental feature of reality, and it must have come from somewhere, and the place that gave rise to the basic feature of consciousness must also be conscious. And when we start to get into basic conscious origin points for all reality, what would you call that? a conscious source of the universe. What would you call that? That would be it. That's kind of the normal term. You start to think about the nature of the world around you and extrapolate from it. And if that's interesting enough of an idea for you, then you'd bother getting in the laboratory. And that's faith. Faith and doubt can coexist. They are not antonyms. For instance, they're married, newly married. She's pregnant. They're committed because they're having a kid together. Their first kid, like their first marriage. They're like serious. This is it. And in our tribe, you get married how many times? You get married one time. That's it. You get one marriage. And if you marry the wrong person, what do? Suffer. And learn. Learn your lessons. There may be some exceptions, just like there's exceptions to murder, but you don't bother saying, like, actually, we don't believe in murder. You say we believe in murder, it's a crime, and then if people want to really bug you about it, you explain the exceptions to the rule. Do you guys follow this? So, do you have faith that she's going to be faithful to you? Yes. Do you have faith he's going to be faithful to you? Yeah. Do you have any doubts whatsoever? You guys are stupid. How long you know each other?
Less than a year.
What kind of stupid person has complete and absolute faith in another person after less than a year? Never has any doubts whatsoever. Doubts in the Vedas are a sign of intelligence. Let's take another married couple. I'm going to tell you, hey, Pujari. Do you ever have any doubts in Kat? See, they've been married longer than you. They're not so stupid. The oxytocin levels in their brain have dissipated a little bit, and they can now think a little more clearly. I think it's perfectly reasonable. While you guys were getting together, she would express doubts in you to me, her father figure. If I heard serious doubts, then I would have recommended that you guys pause things. But I didn't hear serious doubts. I heard the kind of doubts that all people have at one point or another who are involved in a good, committed relationship. So I didn't think anything of it. Do you have faith in Kat? But you also sometimes have a little doubt too, right? How is that possible? That you can simultaneously have faith in and a little bit of doubt? Is that Tootie? Tootie, being the entrepreneur that he is, he's a fashionista with his cool face mask with his daughter's face on it. And he's eating way too many donuts these days, as you can tell by his rotund size. Tootie's opening up his donut shop. It's been a multi-year endeavor. Yeah, let's give him a round of applause. You open up on Tuesday?
Wednesday.
On Wednesday they're opening up. You guys should all go there and get fat on his vegan donuts offered to Krishna that are made by him and his devotee wife. They're both initiated devotees. They offer everything to Krishna. They're vegan, they're healthy, they're yummy. You guys should go there and spend money on donuts and get fat. That is our goal, to make you all unhealthy. So it's been years he's been working on this. And you made donuts for everybody, right?
Yeah.
He made donuts for everybody tonight. So they wanted the first donuts they made in their new kitchen, in their new establishment that they built from the ground up to be offered to all the devotees at the temple. Right? Let's give him another round of applause. We all hope that you guys are fantastically successful. strikingly successful. Just incredibly, earth-shatteringly successful. And that you guys open multiple locations. And you turn that place is practically a mint over there. And you guys are able to hire people and live the life of Riley and relax and be happy, chant Hare Krishna, get Brahma initiation, worship the deities, and have a wonderful life. You look around the world, you do the math, and you think, hey, this makes a little bit of sense. I'm going to try it out. It makes enough sense to get me to buy the beginner course. It makes enough sense for me to put my foot in the door. I'll take the 2-week course or the free course or this or that, or I'll take the entry-level thing. I'll chant Hare Krishna a little bit with you guys. I'll do some kirtan. Maybe I'll modify my life a little bit. You follow? That's life, and that's spiritual life too. Faith can coexist with doubt. You move from having a more doubtful faith to having a more faithful doubt until eventually your doubt is small and your faith is big, until eventually your faith becomes irrevocable, like a line in a stone, and it becomes incredibly powerful. Powerful enough to move mountains. Powerful enough to pierce through the matrix and give you a glimpse of something beyond this world. I think we need to draw the line in the sand there and refuse to move from that proposition until we've established our point of view, and then we can move forward with our theology. Now, the verse I want to talk about, that was all an intro, and that became the whole class. And you guys will see why. The verse I want to talk about, Jata Shraddha Matkatasu Nirvina Savakarmasu Veda Dukatmakam Kaman Prityage Api Anishwaraha. Having awakened faith in chanting about me. Having awakened faith in talking about me. And disgusted with materialism. Nirvana means disgusted. It also means callous towards materialism. You're over materialism. I'm a little bit over materialism. I spent a lot of years of my life betting on the wrong horse, thinking that material things would make me happy. And it hasn't worked yet, and I'm starting to have some doubt in that proposition. How about you? He's exhausted. I'm not as old as you, so I'm not quite as exhausted, but I'm heading in that direction. I'm thinking I'm going to get there. I believe you. I have faith in you. I'm looking at the trajectory, and it's making sense to me. That math is making sense to me. Nirvina sarvakarmasu Veda dukatmakam kaman. You know that all calm, all desire is dukatmakam. It's really comprised of suffering. Veda, you know. Veda dukatmakam kaman. You know that all sense gratification leads to suffering. But prityage api anishwaraha. But you're unable to give it up. So, let me ask you guys a question. And we're going to move fast here, because I don't have a lot of time. And I actually had kind of a big class to give. And I just didn't feel right speaking on higher topics until I did the entry-level stuff, which we've just done a little bit. We did enough where I'm feeling comfortable moving on. How many of you know that materialism isn't going to make you happy? Raise your hand. Okay. That's everybody. The whole room raise your hand, except for a few Indians in the back who refuse to raise their hand. Maybe they don't speak English. I don't know. Everybody raise their hand. Like everybody. How many of you still engage in materialistic activities sometimes? Just see. Faith and doubt coexist together. See it? Krishna knows that. And so thousands of years ago, he threw down these two verses for you. You follow this? We're going to get to that in a minute. In our theology, we have a 9-part system for how you get to see Krishna. And when I say Krishna, see Krishna, I don't mean figuratively or metaphorically. I mean we have a 9-part system for what will enable the eyes of your soul to see and embrace Krishna. For real. More real than us sitting here talking to each other. Not this virtual reality game. The real deal, you, the soul, who you really are. You can see and embrace Krishna. We got 9 steps to get you there. These steps are mined from our texts. This is one of the texts these steps are mined from, and they were codified 5 centuries ago by one of our framers, Rupa Goswami, in the early 1540s. 9 steps. First step, Shraddha, faith. I didn't want to assume faith, so I took the trouble to define faith. We spent the whole time defining the first of the 9 steps, so you guys will understand. And of course, if you don't have faith in something, you won't try it. You won't get in the laboratory. You follow? St. Augustine, 1800 years ago, called it the primacy of will in the acquisition of knowledge. If you're not willing to get into it, you can't learn anything. Because to learn anything, even if the truth is out there, to learn it, like if you want to understand general and special relativity in quantum physics, you can learn that. But you have to actually pick up a book and watch a YouTube video and get into it a little bit and learn a little bit of a technical vocabulary and see the experiments that were done. There's stuff out there. Radio waves floating through the air. But you can't see them, but they're there. And if you get the right devices, you can pick it up. Air pressure, how are you going to measure that? A barometer. You get the right instruments, you put the time in, there's all sorts of stuff going on. Creepy crawlies on your skin. Get a big enough microscope, you can see them. You got to have enough interest. Our tradition mentions there's 2 types of faith. There's swabhavika, it's just innate, or it's bala utpadita, it's placed in you by another. Somebody by the strength of their faith bequeaths it to you and convinces you. The 2 ways people require enough interest to try. They're either naturally interested in spiritual stuff and they want to try stuff out. They have a natural predisposition towards it. Or somebody, somewhere, at some time took the trouble to lay it out for them in a way that got them up and got them to move, got them to try it out. The entire class was designed to either A, teach you how to do that with somebody else, or B, do it with you. The whole class was designed to give you a drop of faith so you could jump up and do kirtan with some gusto, with some heart. Once you get a little bit of faith, what do? Sadhu Sangha. You associate with spiritual people. If you're interested in jiu-jitsu, you start hanging out with jiu-jitsukas. If you're interested in donuts, start going on YouTube and watching videos on donuts. You know? Researching it. If you're interested in kirtan, you start hanging out with people who do kirtan. Pretty soon they're like, hey, you should play a tune. Let me show you. And you start to practice, and then they encourage you, and you start to do it yourself. Isn't it? Next step, bhajana kriya. You start to actually engage in spiritual activities. Because you saw other people doing it, and you copy them. You mimic them. Just like you learn everything. That's how we learn how to speak. We learn everything like that, through mimicry, through imitation. Then all of a sudden it becomes ours. Look, I'm like, how did you know how to speak? You copied people. But all of us now have a black belt. English is ours, but it came from somebody else. We didn't invent the language. Everything was imitation and mimicry. And then over time, it became ours. And now we can describe our innermost thoughts. Amazingly, your thoughts are in language, which means you learned how to speak before you learned how to think. Children think in impressions. As they grow up and learn how to speak, they start to have more complicated thoughts. You learn another language. Like I was living in Mexico, I started dreaming in Spanish. I started speaking in Spanish, I started thinking in Spanish. But my Spanish, it was better. It's okay. I can speak. I can make it happen. But my thoughts became dumbed down because my Spanish was dumbed down. So my thoughts were dumbed down because I had to think in Spanish, and my thoughts were what I could speak. Does that make sense? I'm almost certain Prabhupada thought in English. That's what happens when you spend enough time in a place. Just looking at the way he spoke. It's almost 100% sure he thought in English. You can learn something from somebody else through mimicry and imitation and have it become yours fully 100%. Your thoughts and language are one such example, perhaps the most powerful example of all, because they're intrinsic and they're basic to everything else that happens in our life. Somebody gives you a drop of faith, you hang out with spiritual people, Shraddha, Sadhu Sangha, Bhajana Kriya, and now you start to do it yourself. There's 6 stages of Bhajana Kriya, also called Anishita Bhakti, unfixed Bhakti. First, there's Utsaha Mayi. You think you're the coolest thing around. You think you've got it all figured out. Like a child who comes home with their parents and says, "Do you know how to spell cat?" "I do. C-A-T." They have this naive enthusiasm. You follow? You've all had that. I've been witness to it. We try to bleed it out of you as quickly as possible. And we're good at that. Then there's Gantar Allah, thick and thin. Some days you're all about it, some days you're not into it at all. There's Vuvikalpa. You just can't figure out what you're supposed to do with your life, and you've got doubts, and you're up and down and all over the place. Vishaya Sangara, you struggle with sense gratification. The spirit is strong, but the flesh is weak. Niyamakshama, you are no longer committing sinful acts, but you find it hard to chant your japa every day and do your spiritual, keep your vows, your positive vows. One is you have a difficult time getting rid of the negative, then you have a difficult time accentuating the positive. And then Taranga Rangini, you play in the waves. Then you're a devotee, you dress like a devotee, you got some tilak on, you know a couple of verses. People start going, "You're a devotee." And you start thinking, "I'm a devotee, this is cool." And you play in the waves instead of diving deep into the ocean to get the treasure. As a result of spiritual practice, anartha nivritti happens. You clear unwanted things from your heart. There's 4 types of unwanted things from your heart that get cleared. Once that's done, you then have achieved Nishta Bhakti, fixed devotion. The definition of faith in the Chaitanya Charitamrita that I quoted, faith is a complete conviction that just by serving Krishna, you'll achieve everything. Interestingly, it's not like Paul's faith, which is a basic faith in God or Jesus. It's a faith that God already exists, but if I live my life in accordance with serving Krishna, my life will be successful. It's an intermediate level of faith which assumes that the deity exists. And it's based on the idea of what your interaction with the deity should comprise. Paul's definition of faith, which is most people's definition of faith, is that faith is just the basic belief in God. But the definition of faith that our tradition codified 4 centuries back, in 1611, it was that faith is not only the belief that God exists, but that you should live your life serving Krishna, and that will be a successful life. You follow? Now, you may not be able to practice that, but you may believe it. So the definition works if you're able to follow or if you're not able to follow. It's an interesting definition. It works for both stages, the unsteady devotion and the steady devotion. Anyway, then you get to the stage of nishta. Nishta means you're fixed. You're not going anywhere. You're settled. Then ruchi happens. Then you start to really enjoy chanting Hare Krishna. There's two types of ruchi. Vaishishta pekshani and Vaishishta anapekshani. One time is the example given is if a meal is well prepared and you have a little appetite, if the meal is well prepared, maybe you'll eat something. If it's not a nice meal, you won't eat. Compared to somebody who's ravenously hungry. Whatever you give them, like, those are the best saltines I've ever had. That's the higher level. When if the kirtan's nicely done, you relish, you have a lower form of ruchi. When the kirtan's poorly done and you're still in ecstasy, that's the higher level. That leads to asakti. Asakti is when it's not about the kirtan anymore, it's about the person that the kirtan's about. You fall in love with Krishna. You start thinking about Krishna all the time. Krishna's like your lover, like your long-lost lover that you just can't stop thinking about. You chant, you still chant, but you chant because then you feel closer to Krishna. It's not the spiritual practice that enlivens you, it's the person that is the subject of the spiritual practice, the object of the spiritual practice. Then that leads to bhav. Bhav has 9 symptoms, 2 of which are samutkanta and ashabandha. You have boundless hope. You have full faith, full confidence. You're fearless. Unflinching trust. Unflinching hope. And samutkanta, you're incredibly eager. Samutkanta means your neck is stretched. Just like you're just eagerly expecting Krishna. And then prema. And then love of God. You see Krishna. Seeing Krishna happens in the beginning in spurti, in glimpses, and then it becomes eventually continual. And somewhere along the way you leave your body. And you go back to Godhead. But the glimpses and the darshans and the visions start long before you pass away from this world. So we got a whole system. But you got to get up and start moving. Usually we don't tell you about the whole system because it would blow your mind. It's just too much. Your brain is too small. The idea is too big. So you just chant Hare Krishna with us and you feel something in your heart. And then if you stick around for long enough, magic starts to happen. You keep thinking that was magic. But then 6 months later, you're like, wow, that's magic. And like a year later, you're like, man, that was the magic. And like 5 years later, you're like, well, I just got here and that's the magic. You keep thinking like, I never believed it could be this special. All starts with faith. In a lot of ways, it's just a crystallizing of that faith and that conviction and that trust over time and the gradual dissipation of doubts and the gradual crystallizing and strengthening of that faith that is the entire continuum of bhakti. So Krishna says, if you've awakened that little bit of faith and you're still engaged in nonsense, then what should you do? Tato bhajeta mam prita. Then you should lovingly worship me. Shraddhalu, drida nischaya, with full faith. With full faith, dridha nischa, with strong, certain faith. This is the original verse thousands of years ago. This verse was reworked into Bengali 400 years ago, and that was the definition of faith I gave you. It comes from this verse. You should worship Krishna with complete faith. Jusha manas chatan kaman duk udarkans shagan. And you should feel remorse knowing that the sense gratification you're engaged in isn't going to make you happy. Keep doing what you're doing and add Krishna. Put that 1 in front of all those zeros and it becomes a magnificent number. And then Krishna goes on to say, then within your heart I'll be able to cut the knot in your heart and release you from your bondage and show you a glimpse of something bigger. There's a synergy. We got to be open to it. We got free will. We got to open that door to our heart, let Krishna in, We got to move the umbrella if we want to feel that beautiful rain. It all starts with a little drop of faith, a little curiosity. A curiosity that's enough to get you up, make you move, make you try it out. Hang out with some people who seem like they know what they're doing. Then you start to know what you're doing. Then miracles start to happen. It starts to become really special. Then nothing's going to stop you. And then eventually the magic fully happens. And there's a period in there where you know, you've learned, you have some conviction, but you're not quite able to practice what you preach. You're not able to fully follow. And so what do? You feel some remorse in your heart, which is purifying. Remorse in Sanskrit is called anutap. The purifier after the fact. Anu means after. In Greek it's metanoia. Metanoia means afterthought. Metaphysics, metanoia, afterthought. Anutap, after purification. You made a mistake, you do the wrong thing, but then you think about it afterwards and you feel bad that you made a mistake, and that chastens you and cooks it out of you and bleeds it out of you and helps become better. But we never tell somebody, oh, you can't, you're too fallen to come. You've got too many desires, you have too many doubts. No, just come along. Try it out. Let's see what happens. Okay, we went over time. Let's do a little kirtan from the heart. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.